Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a global challenge that's, well, it's just immense in scale and deeply human. We're talking about global displacement. By October 2023, we hit a staggering 114 million people displaced worldwide.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Think about that for a moment. That's more than the entire population of France and Germany combined, just uprooted.
It really is. It's a number that represents just enormous human movement, and, it puts incredible pressure on systems everywhere.
A historical high, really.
Absolutely, it is. And it's driven by this complex mix of things, new conflicts, ongoing ones, climate shocks getting worse, violence, persecution.
All these forces pushing people out.
Exactly. Forces compelling millions to just leave everything. And while, many stay within their own countries, a huge number are looking for safety across international border.
And that's where the European Union really comes into focus for us today,
Yeah,
right?
precisely. That's our focal point for this deep dive.
Okay. So our mission today is to understand this really intricate, often challenging landscape of asylum and migration, specifically within the EU. We're focusing on the key developments from 2023 into early 2024. We're going to unpack the EU's efforts to manage these unprecedented flows, look at the policy breakthroughs they've tried to make.
And maybe more importantly, shine a light on the big hurdles that are still there.
Yeah, exactly. We're pulling insights straight from the Asylum Report 2024 and related news, basically giving you a shortcut to being properly informed on Europe's evolving approach.
And it's an approach that's, let's be honest, sometimes pretty tumultuous.
For sure.
And what you'll get from this isn't just like a list of policies. It's about understanding the realities on the ground for the states trying to manage things and for the individuals seeking protection.
Right.
We'll look at everything from these ambitious new pacts, the reemergence of internal border controls, how nations are struggling to just streamline procedures and handle the sheer volume.
It's a tough balancing act, isn't it? Humanitarian obligations versus national capacities.
Absolutely. That's the core tension.
So let's start by really digging into the numbers because they tell a powerful story, immense pressure.
They really do.
In 2023 alone, EU plus countries got over 1.1 million asylum applications.
Over 1.1 million.
And here's the kicker. That's on top of the roughly 4 million displaced Ukrainians already getting temporary protection across Europe.
That's such a crucial piece of context. It's not just one wave, it's multiple pressures simultaneously.
This isn't just a small increase. This is a system under, well, unprecedented strain, pushing capacities right to the limit.
That's exactly right. And the immediate result, as the Asylum Report puts it quite starkly, is saturated reception systems and rising backlogs of decisions on first-instance applications.
So basically, overflowing facilities and massive delays.
Exactly. The places meant to house and process people are full, and the administrative side just can't keep up.
Creates a huge bottleneck.
A critical one, yeah. Leading to longer waits, worse living conditions sometimes, and just more strain on resources everywhere.
So faced with these, frankly, overwhelming numbers, what's the EU trying to do? How are they trying to get a handle on this?
Well, a really big piece of the puzzle is the new Pact on Migration and Asylum.
Yes, the new Pact. Adopted December 2023. It was hailed as a major breakthrough after years of difficult negotiations.
Very difficult, yes. The stated goal is pretty ambitious. Create a functional and modern migration and asylum architecture.
Sounds good on paper.
It does. And the purpose, officially, is about converging practices, getting member states more aligned, enabling them to handle the high numbers more uniformly.
But what's the reality behind it?
Well, the deeper insight, perhaps, is that this pact, while it's a political step forward, it's maybe less about radical new ideas and more about formalizing compromises that were already sort of there.
Yeah.
It brings in this idea of mandatory solidarity, but crucially, with a lot of flexibility. States can choose to pay money or offer support instead of actually taking in asylum seekers.
So not necessarily direct relocation?
Not necessarily, no. The report stresses that member states will need perseverance. That means, additional resources and detailed national implementation plans to actually tackle those backlogs and align their systems.
So it's a long road ahead for implementation.
A very long road. It really shows how the EU struggles with genuine burden sharing. Often, political consensus wins out over truly unified action.
And the EUAA, the asylum agency, what's their role?
They're meant to be key. They have an enhanced mandate to help harmonize practices, improve Europe's protection capacity, but honestly, it's a huge task.
Okay, so that's the big picture, the EU level plan. But what about on the ground, at national borders? Because individual countries are feeling this pressure directly.
Well, absolutely. And they're responding with their own measures, sometimes quite controversially.
Like Poland, for instance. Late 2023, they brought back border controls with Germany and Lithuania.
That's right. Their justification was increased pressure, especially on the EU's eastern flank, and what they called the instrumentalization of migrants by the Belarusian regime.
And Lithuania was doing something similar.
Lithuania kept a state of emergency going for similar reasons. They argue Belarus is deliberately pushing migrants towards their border as a kind of geopolitical weapon.
Now, what's interesting here, and maybe doesn't get enough attention in the security talk, is the economic impact of these internal borders coming back.
That's a huge point. German industry, for example, has been quite vocal.
Right, I saw that. Helena Melnikov from the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce.
Yes, she warned that if commuters at the German-Polish border can no longer reliably and punctually get to work, they might just look elsewhere permanently.
Which hits skilled labor shortages, especially in places like Brandenburg.
Exactly. It's not just a minor hassle. It's constricting real economic activity, potentially harming labor markets long-term.
And Dirk Jandura, from the German Wholesale and Foreign Trade Federation, he put it pretty bluntly, too.
What did he say?
Isolation doesn't solve problems. It creates new ones. For supply chains, employees, and economic cohesion in Europe.
Strong words.
Yeah. Though he did add, the caveat that border security must take priority when needed. But he still felt the current measures were like a regression, a step backwards for Europe.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? National security versus the EU's single market principles.
Definitely. Which brings us to another crucial bit. Public sentiment and political tensions. These actions don't happen in a vacuum.
Not at all. The Asylum report points out that immigration-related fears remain at the top of voters' minds. High numbers of arrivals create fear.
Which leads people to support politicians advocating restrictive policies.
It's a direct feedback loop. Public concern fuels political action, which can then reinforce those fears.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you see this frustration, these sharp national perspectives, playing out raw online.
Oh, yeah, like where?
We'll take a Reddit thread discussing Poland's border controls. You get comments like, EU is weakening because of the fence-hopping groups, a real sense of sovereignty being challenged.
Right.
Then you get these really pointed comments aimed at Germany. Things like, Germany wanted them so bad and now trying to put Poland to blame again?
Oof. History coming into play there.
Totally. And sarcastic jabs like, Herzlich willkommen, but it's your falut now. Playing on Merkel's, wir schaffen das.
Wow. Shows the underlying tensions between member states.
Definitely. And of course, you get counter-arguments too, like people bring up the alleged Polish cash for visa scandal. It's messy.
It really highlights the complex, sometimes fraught, political dynamics.
And alongside that frustration, you see these strong calls for tougher enforcement. Right.
Absolutely. Comments like, just start doing raids like in the U.S., or raid and deport. Even calls for an EU version of IC.
Reflects a real desire among some for more decisive action. Maybe a feeling that current systems aren't working.
Yeah, a perception of ineffectiveness. And there's even this theory debated online that we're not validating it, just noting it.
What theory?
That the whole approach, welcoming migrants, was primarily economical. To prop up aging populations, avoid decline, keep wages down, profits up.
That's quite a cynical take, but it shows the range of public thought, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Shows how broad the discussion and the suspicion can be.
And reflecting that push for more national control, Poland's also proposing a policy to temporarily suspend asylum applications in certain border areas.
It's a big move. Still needs parliamentary approval, potential court challenges.
But it clearly signals an effort to exert more control right at the border, deciding who even gets to apply.
Definitely. Now, moving on to how the system itself tries to manage things. Let's talk about the Dublin system.
Dublin. The procedure that's supposed to figure out which EU country is responsible for handling an asylum claim. Usually the first country of entry.
Usually, yeah. But as you can imagine, with the numbers we're talking about, Dublin units everywhere are just swamped.
Under massive pressure.
Immense. And you see situations like Italy temporarily stopping incoming Dublin transfers. That just pushes the pressure onto other countries, like Germany, who are trying to send people back to Italy under the rules.
So it becomes less a system and more like procedural hot potato.
That's a pretty good way to put it sometimes, especially at this scale. It's complex.
And the courts are involved too, the CJU.
Yes, the Court of Justice of the EU. They've been ruling on specific aspects, clarifying things like, the need for proper information and interviews during transfers.
Okay.
We're also ruling on how responsibility shifts if deadlines are missed. Like, responsibility might pass from one country to another if they don't act fast enough.
Adds more layers of complexity, even while trying to clarify.
Exactly. And to cope with the sheer volume, there's also this big push to speed up the asylum process itself.
How are they doing that?
Using special procedures, like border procedures and these safe country of origin concepts. The aim is just to get through applications faster.
Save country lists.
Yeah.
Like Germany adding Georgia and Moldova, and Italy adding Cote d'Ivoire, Georgia, Nigeria, the Gambia.
Precisely. The idea is that people from these countries are generally not at risk of persecution, so their claims can be processed and often rejected much faster.
That's controversial.
Highly controversial. Civil society groups raise serious concerns. They worry it risks sending people back to danger without a proper individual assessment, violating the non-refoulement principle.
And what about people who move from one EU country to another after applying secondary movements?
Generally, their later applications are deemed inadmissible. You get one shot, basically, under the Dublin logic.
Okay, so what does all this mean for people whose applications are rejected? What about returns?
Well, the asylum report is clear. An effective and humane return is an integral part of a credible asylum system. Makes sense, right?
Replica, yes, but the reality...
The reality is tough. Frontex, the EU border agency, points to a large discrepancy between the number of negative decisions and the number of actual returns carried out.
So a gap between decisions and implementation.
And that gap seems to be getting wider. It's a huge challenge actually carrying out returns. Lots of people end up in limbo without legal status.
And the EU Commission is focused on this.
Very focused. They talk about a unified, comprehensive, and effective EU system on returns, pushing things like mutual recognition of return decisions between member states.
And the courts have weighed in here too.
Yes, interestingly, the CJEU ruled on cases involving people convicted of particularly serious crime. They said the assessment for removing protection didn't have to consider the risks the person might face if returned.
Wow, okay, so a strong focus on internal security for the host country in those cases?
It signals that, yes, prioritizing state security over potential return risks for individuals convicted of serious crimes. But practically, executing returns remains incredibly difficult. Lack of cooperation from origin countries, humanitarian concerns, legal challenges.
Beyond the legal side, there's the day-to-day reality. Reception conditions, managing costs.
Absolutely critical. The report is frank about persistent problems providing suitable accommodation. You get reports of homelessness, people living in destitute or just substandard conditions.
That's the human cost of these overwhelmed systems.
It really is. And states are trying different things to manage costs. Belgium's looking at making working applicants contribute to reception costs.
And also setting a deadline for leaving reception after a final negative decision.
Yeah, 30 days. It's about encouraging self-sufficiency, maybe managing resources more tightly.
Other examples?
Well, Finland is considering cutting the allowance for applicants to the possible minimum, just tightening the belt financially.
And Malta.
Malta has a policy blocking labor market access for 9 months for people from safe countries or in the Dublin process, though they still get accommodation and basic aid.
Shows the different national strategies, trying to balance care with cost control and discouraging irregular stays.
Exactly. It's a real patchwork of approaches, trying to deal with the financial and logistical load.
Now, amidst all this focus on control, procedures, costs, is there still attention paid to vulnerable people?
Yes, that's an important point. The system, at least on paper, also aims to protect the most vulnerable.
Like who?
Children, especially unaccompanied minors, women and girls with efforts against gender-based violence, FGMC, persons with disabilities, LGBTIQ plus applicants.
So there are efforts to build in safeguards and support.
There are. It shows that dual aim control, yes, but also compassion. Though making that work effectively at this scale is, well, a massive challenge.
And what about technology? Is digitalization playing a role?
Definitely. It's a clear trend. Finland's trying to digitalize its whole Aliens Act, move away from paper.
And Sweden.
Sweden's already seen savings from their digital LMA card for asylum seekers, something like 6.5 million Swedish krona in 2022.
So it's about efficiency, cost savings.
Efficiency, data sharing, reducing admin burden, making things more transparent, hopefully. But, it also brings up questions about digital access for applicants, data security.
Always trade-offs.
Always.
So to kind of wrap this up, what we've unpacked today shows Europe really grappling with an extraordinary situation.
Yeah.
You've got the urgent humanitarian needs of millions clashing right up against strained national resources. And this really complex, sometimes very tense political climate in the EU.
It feels like a pivotal moment.
Yeah, Europe's navigating this really tricky path between its stated values protection, human dignity, and the hard, practical realities of managing migration on this scale.
It is. And the path forward is definitely not simple. We've seen the ambition in the new pact, but also the real-world challenges like border controls, the economic impacts, the public anxiety.
So the big question remains,
Yeah, given the strained systems, the backlogs, the different national priorities, how can the EU actually achieve a truly cohesive, effective asylum system, one that meets humanitarian duties and addresses the security and economic concerns of member states?
what role will tech play? Or shifting public opinion?
And maybe the core question, can Europe find that sustainable balance between an open internal market and secure external borders while still upholding its core values? It's a question that's going to define the continent for a long time to come.